This episode of Market Foolery is brought to you by Harry's. For guys who want a great shave experience for a fraction of what you're paying now, go to harrys.com. Get $5 off your first purchase by entering the promo code FOOL when you check out. It's Thursday, July 21st. Welcome to Market Foolery. I'm Chris Hill. Joining me in studio today from $1 Million Portfolio, Matt Argersinger. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, always.
We are wrapping up Deep Dive Week. Next week, we'll get back to, I'll be back from Canada, and we'll get back to sort of the day-to-day business news. But we're going to talk Amazon. At our recent Fool Fest event, wasn't this your stock for the next 10 years?
It was.
That was one of the breakout sessions that we did. It was on the main stage, you and a bunch of other analysts and advisors. I know you're a fan of this business, but let's start to dig into it and sort of the metrics that investors can use to evaluate it. But let's start with the main engine of this. This is certainly a much more diverse business than it was, say, certainly 15 years ago, but even 10 years ago.
It is. But really, it's the same thing driving it, Chris. I mean, if you look at something that Jeff Bezos has talked about almost from day one, he's talked about this flywheel, this virtuous cycle that Amazon's business depends on. And here, in a nutshell, here it is. You have lower prices. Lower prices drive more customer visits. More customer visits drives more sales. More sales volume brings third-party retailers who pay Amazon commissions to get their wares in front of these new customers. That allows Amazon to leverage its fulfillment centers, its distribution, its servers, lower prices even further, more customer visits. The virtuous cycle just keeps repeating. And this is no matter what Amazon's gone into, whether it is just plain old online retail, whether it's Amazon Web Services, whether it's digital streaming, it's always about lower prices, more customer visits, getting more leverage over your costs, repeat, lower prices and repeat. So there's that. That is the driver of the business, in my view. Now, what they have today that they didn't have 10 years ago is Prime. And by all estimates, it's anywhere between 50 and 70 million about how many Prime members.
Wait a minute. Are we up to that number?
We are up to that number. The best sort of, the consensus mean estimate I see out there is 63 million. That's kind of where a lot of research is landing.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
A year ago, weren't we talking about, maybe it was a year and a half ago, we were talking that the range was 20 to 25.
Well, I think...
Or am I might not be remembering.
No, I think it's just we've been ratcheting it up. I remember a year ago, it was 30 to 40 was kind of maybe at the end of, a year ago.
And by the way, this is you and a lot of other analysts who study this company trying to read the tea leaves as best you can. Yes. Because at no point has Amazon ever come out and said, this is how many we have.
We're spitballing, but we feel like, analysts, we feel like we've got a range. And the range right now is, let's call it 60 million. So you have 60 million members who are paying Amazon, roughly $100 a year. And they get all kinds of benefits for that. But what Amazon gets out of that is an incredibly loyal customer base who's not only paying them this nice, membership fee, constant recurring streaming revenue, but these customers on average are spending more than double what the average Amazon customer is selling. It's some peg it as average around $1,200 a year. I don't know about you, but I feel like I spend a lot more as a Prime member than that. So you've got the flywheel of this business. Now you have a loyal, sticky, huge now, massive customer base. That, by the way, can get a lot bigger. In Amazon, and those to me are just now the driving engines of the business.
It's pretty incredible because when you were talking about the flywheel, one of the things I was thinking about was how this is something that Amazon hasn't really pulled back the curtain on, and certainly kept this very close to the vest for a long time. And over time, people started to figure this out, and they have sort of revealed a little bit more about this. But I think the thing that a lot of people on Wall Street missed about Amazon for, I'm going to say, the first, let's call it 10 years of their business, is the analytical side. The fact that it's, because I think it was easy to just sort of look, well, it's a website that sells stuff. There are a lot of websites that sell stuff. And nobody was really thinking about the degree to which Jeff Bezos and his team were analyzing every single bit of data and using that data to inform improvements both to the site, the customer experience, and also to what they're going to sell.
Oh yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about Facebook and Google, the big data companies. These companies know everything about you. They know what you like. They know where you're going. They know where you're visiting. They know where you're eating. But if you think about it, Amazon was the first big data company. And not only that, the data that Amazon has, to me, is the most powerful data in the world, because these are customers spending dollars. They're voting with their feet and their wallets. And no company has that kind of data. And so Amazon's ability to gather that data, use that data, make decisions, come out with new products, new services based on that data and based on customer behavior it's massive.
In terms of the competitive landscape, this is another business. Simon Erickson and I were talking the other day about Alphabet. In the same way as Alphabet, if you're asking where does Amazon sit on the competitive landscape, on the top is the answer.
Right.
But just in terms of retail competition, what do you see when you look out there? Because it seems like, if we're talking general retail, there's not a whole lot to be worried about. That's not to say that Bezos and his team aren't appropriately paranoid, but it seems like we're seeing niche retailers have more success online than general retailers.
Yes, it's really actually hard, I think, to pinpoint. So if we use sort of the model of just traditional retail, right? Amazon is by far the Walmart of traditional retail, and so as far as Walmart's eviscerated mom and pop stores and other discount retailers for years, Amazon's essentially doing that to anyone who tries to really do that online. Where there are niche players. We talk about Wayfair now and then, companies that really specialize in certain areas, and Amazon, for whatever reason, hasn't really broached too much into that area. But again, a lot of these, even the niche players, are eventually either already using Amazon or eventually going to use Amazon because it just makes sense for them to do that. That's where you're going to reach the most customers. I will say this, though, just about Amazon. We think of Amazon as this dominant company, and it really is. But put it in context. Only 8% of total retail sales in the U.S. take place online. Well, at least as of last year. And if you strip out things like gas and restaurant sales, it's a $3.2 trillion retail market in the U.S. on an annual basis. Amazon has $100 billion in revenue. That's about 3% of that. And so, you throw out big numbers like those Prime numbers, you throw out $100 billion in revenue and everything that Amazon is doing, and the fact that it's, especially for younger people, such an intricate part of their shopping lives, right? But Amazon is still so much, farther to grow. And Walmart, Walmart accounts for about 15% of total retail sales in the United States. Amazon's at 3%. Just let that sink in for a second as we talk about Amazon's, competitive position.
What do you think is the threat that they're focused on? I was going to say, what do you think is the threat that keeps Jeff Bezos up at night? I don't know that there necessarily is one, but what do you think is the biggest threat that they see?
Well, my first risk is that I hope Jeff Bezos keeps waking up every day, as he goes to sleep, because in my view, he culturally innovative. He's the innovative heart of the company. If he leaves or he decides he wants to take a rocket to Mars and that doesn't work out, that's a huge risk to Amazon. But in more short term, I think, and you're starting to hear rumblings about this, I still think it's the regulatory antitrust actions that could potentially start coming toward Amazon, especially as they expand abroad. I mean, it's in the U.S. we're kind of lax when it comes to companies that are expanding, like or Google, Facebook, that have such dominant mind share already, but it is a true risk. I think even politicians now are starting to talk about the fact that Amazon just seems to be dominating every part. I was
going to say Donald Trump has been very pointed in his remarks about Jeff Bezos.
So I don't think any of this is really serious right now, but I do think a year, 2, 3 years from now, we're going to talk a lot more about antitrust actions when it comes to Amazon.
All right. Before we move on, I got to say a word about Harry's. I said this the other day. I love Harry's products. I've been using them for years. They ship it right to your doorstep. You don't have to stand in line at the drugstore. You don't have to wait for someone to unlock the plexiglass safe because they're behind there because razors are so expensive. But not at Harry's. That's why two guys started it. They wanted to create a better shaving experience at an affordable price. And it's easy to get started because it takes less than 30 seconds to place an order. Go to harrys.com. They'll give you $5 off your first purchase with the promo code FOOL. And you'll see why over 1 million guys have made the switch to Harry's. So harrys.com, check it out, and make sure you enter the promo code FOOL when you're checking out. All right, the earnings report comes out for Amazon. What are the first couple of things that you are looking at to get a sense of how they did?
Amazon is still today, even as big as it is, it's still to me a revenue story. So we're looking at revenue growth, top line overall. But I'd say this: I've especially in recent years, I've paid a lot more attention to international revenue growth. For a long time, for whatever reason, Amazon's international revenue growth really struggled. I mean, it was growing, but it was kind of lagging behind U.S. retail sales. But recently, it's really been picking up. And I think that, as an investor, to see that segment grow either in line or even faster than U.S. retail sales or North American retail sales, that's really important to me. I want to keep watching that. Other than that, I mean, the one thing I pay attention to, always every quarter, there are so many analysts that just, begrudge Amazon's lack of profitability. I mean, but one metric to really pay attention to is operating cash flow. A lot of people don't know this, but Amazon, for being called not profitable or not caring about profits, they generated about $11 billion in operating cash flow over the last 12 months. That's huge. Now, that includes, there's some adjustments in, there's working capital, there's stock-based compensation. I get all that. But again, that's money hitting the cash register for Amazon on the operating side. That's a big number, and I watch that all the time, and it's been accelerating, especially as a lot of Amazon's business, including web services, really starts to turn it on and mature. So, again, from that lens, we think Amazon is an expensive stock. It is expensive, but if that number keeps climbing as fast as it has been recently, Amazon's not that expensive as a stock, especially when you think about the growth and the market opportunity they still have.
I'm glad you mentioned web services. Do they break that out specifically?
They do.
And say this is what the revenue from AWS was?
Yes, and they didn't as of about 18 months ago, but now they have, and I think that's been...
Do you think they started breaking it out because it started to get impressive?
Oh, sure. Anytime you have a segment where revenue and profits are growing in excess of 50%, I think that's a segment you want to start highlighting.
I think we've talked about this before. Bezos earlier this year was out in California at the Recode conference. Walt Mossberg interviewed him for nearly an hour and a half. I watched the whole thing. It was really interesting to see him in that setting. And two of my takeaways. One is he wants you to buy stuff. Like we were talking before about Prime, and yes, they're still focused on the customer. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, but there were times where he would literally look at the audience and say, no, really, go online and buy some stuff. Like you get that for all the other side projects, and there aren't a lot of these questions about Bezos, but every once in a while you'll see people saying, well, why is he bothering with the space stuff, and why are they doing that? And it's like, you know what? At his heart, he's a guy running a store, and he's very focused on that.
Yeah.
But when he talked about Amazon Web Services, it was clear that was something that started as a test, as they test a lot of different things. But I think the way he couched it was, if we had gone out and surveyed a bunch of people and said, is this a business we should start on our own? Resoundingly, the answer would have been no. And it's pretty interesting that they decided to do that. And you look at how it's kind of like before when we were talking about the data and the way that they analyzed data was kept behind the curtain for a while. Amazon Web Services was sort of the revenue-generating version of that, where you didn't really focus on Amazon Web Services, and then all of a sudden they started sharing some more details, and then that's when a lot of companies just sort of looked at them and said, "Oh my God, they've got a golden goose."
Yeah, it is. Well, just again, I think if you read Bezos' shareholder letters annually going back, many years ago, he mentioned or referenced the fact that the amount that users and businesses were using Amazon's architecture, and that they're doing a lot of interesting things and trying a lot of interesting things, and this all goes back again to that core thing about Amazon wanting to be the most customer-centric company in the world on Earth. And so whatever they're doing, whoever they're serving, they want to keep making I thought on the last shareholder letter it was striking. He said Bezos was saying he wants to make it almost irresponsible for you not to be a Prime member. And again, this is all about, I want to give you so much as a customer, so many features, so many benefits, so much service, such good prices, that you're irresponsible not to come to Amazon and buy something. And whether that's AWS or just the regular retail business, it's what drives everything he's doing.
Let's talk about Bezos. He's not old, but he's also not young. And although you look at, you listen to him talk about this business, or just sort of the way they have the approach of a young, hungry company, and I think Bezos, as you mentioned, is certainly the driver of that. He said at that sit down with Walt Mossberg was like, well, where are you going to be in 5 years? He said, I want to be right here. So as a shareholder, I just said, okay, good. That buys us 5 more years of Bezos. But in terms of the management team, when we look at this, who else is on the bench? Because at some point, and it's not in the next 5 years, but maybe 5 years hence, I think it becomes very reasonable to start asking questions of Jeff Bezos. Are you planning for someone else to run this company? Not because he's old, not because he's not healthy, but I think you can look to the example of Bill Gates stepping aside at Microsoft when he clearly had other things he wants to do that he wanted to do.
Right.
Bezos has other things he wants to do. Right now, for the foreseeable future, it still very much includes running Amazon.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Amazon, for whatever reason, this is not Jeff Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. It's
Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg. I was going to say, and it's not Reid Hoffman and Jeff Weiner or Sergey Brin and Larry Page. There's not this other person that we always talk about.
Gates and at the time, longtime Chief Operating Officer Steve Ballmer.
Correct. And so there's Brian Olsavsky. He's been there. He's Amazon's Chief Financial Officer. He handles all the conference calls. He's been there for about 14 years. Probably the closest guy if Bezos decided to step into a chairman role or a non-CEO role. But other than that, Amazon there's never this other team or other person that's out there that is sort of waiting in line or on the bench, as you say. And so I think it's something they're going to have to start talking about. At the same time, you do look at Bezos, and I believe he's right at 50, maybe early 50s.
I think he's. I want to say he's like 52.
Okay,
let's say early 50s.
Early 50s. So comparing that to, I don't know, Warren Buffett, right? Who, by the way, Amazon's market cap just surpassed Berkshire Hathaway's, amazingly or not.
Wow.
But I see we still have maybe a 30-year plus window of Bezos at least being moderately involved in the business, and that's outstanding. I think if you're an investor and shareholder in Amazon.
Do you think? Let me back up. I don't think, based on everything I've observed of Bezos to this point, I don't think that he's the type of leader who will telegraph when he's leaving and who is going. I don't think it's going to be a thing where, 5 years from now, it's like, and we have a new chief operating officer, and it's clear that person is being groomed to take the helm. And by the way, that's not a knock on Bezos. You look back at Costco and Jim Sinegal. That's exactly how that got handled. I mean, we had Sinegal here. I think it was 2009. I asked him about succession planning as delicately as you can when someone is in their 60s, and he basically said, "Yeah, we've got it covered. We have a plan in place. We're not going to." And then it was at the bottom of an earnings press release. They came out with their quarterly earnings, if you remember, and it was just like, here's what Costco did this quarter. And then at the bottom it was like, and by the way, Jim Sinegal is resigning as of this date, and Craig Jelinek is taking over. I sort of look at that and I go, I think that's how Bezos might do it.
I think so, and I think Amazon would be one of those companies that could get away with doing that. These days, with even, and that was only 7 years ago, but these days with, I think, the attention, the media attention, social media, and the activism from private equity and other investors with companies, it's going to be really hard for a company not to telegraph a move, especially one that's as significant as this. I mean, I remember with Steve Jobs and Apple kind of had to go through so many questions for so many years, right? And it finally happened, and it was a momentous moment, but there was a lot of build up to it. You're right. I totally agree with you. And Amazon's probably one of the few companies that can get away with sort of having no, or at least a sudden succession, out of nowhere.
Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
As always, people on the program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against. So don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. That's going to do it for this edition of Market Foolery. The show is mixed by Dan Boyd. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on Monday.